all of us have these two inclinations inside us, to be group-oriented and to do what's good for the group, which, by the way, is associated with being high in agreeableness, high in conscientiousness, being mentally stable, and to be individually oriented, which is that you strive out and you do what is good for you. Now, that can be also good for the group, indirectly.
Now I come to introduce our next speaker, one of the most interesting thinkers of today. It is, of course, Professor Ed Dutton. He is well known as the Jolly Heretic online, and he is also a prolific author whose many books generally elicit cries of outrage by the traditional enemies of civilization. These include Making Sense of Race, Witches, Feminism and the Fall of the West, Spiteful Mutants, Evolution, Sexuality, Religion and Politics in the 21st Century. And this year he has given us a biography of that most interesting, radical and controversial figure, Jonathan Bowden. Well, with that said, it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Ed Dutton.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Good. Hi, yeah, hi, hello. Right, I've got a bit of a confession to make, to be honest. It's been a difficult morning. I've had a very difficult morning. I had planned, our host was talking about the various books I've written, and I do have a new book out, and this is called Genius Under House Arrest, The Cancellation of James Watson. And my plan was to do a speech on James Watson and genius and how his cancellation is central to an inflection point in our civilization where we've been moved from being pro-genius to anti-genius. But yesterday on the plane, I was corresponding with my friend and co-author, Ollie Rayner Hills, who's sitting over there in that direction, and with whom I wrote Woke Eugenics. And he said, well, Ed, isn't that a bit similar to the speech you did in 2019 at TGB on genius? And I said, well, yeah, but I'd be like, it's updated and whatever. You know, surely I can do that speech. No, you can't. No. But surely, I said, I've thought about it more. It was 6 years ago. I mean, they won't remember that speech. It's okay to surely do an update. No. And this unfortunately threw me off. And then I had the further trauma then this morning of having breakfast with Stefan, who, being German, had really planned his speech out in detail. He'd thought about it. He'd written it down. He was telling me about it, and he was telling me about the values he was going to talk about, and he'd really actually thought about what he was going to say. And this really threw me into a crisis, and I realized that I don't know what I'm going to say. So I'm standing here not sure. But then, when I was very nervous earlier before we started, I had a conversation with a young lady who said, why don't you just riff off the two speeches that are before you? Just sort of listen to them and sort of riff off those and kind of be inspired by those. And that's what's happened. So fortunately, I think I've come up with something. So I'm quite pleased with myself. Well, sort of. And that is one of the things that Stefan talked about was looking in the mirror. The importance of looking in the mirror. Of those of us who are on the, whatever we're supposed to call ourselves these days, is it vitalists, the dissident right, restorationists, I don't know what we're meant to call ourselves, but whatever we are, should look in the mirror, should be self-aware, should be like Eve and take the bite of the apple and understand who we are. For if we do not understand who we are and what we are doing, then how will we be aware enough to be able to do anything? And similarly, if I refer to Alexander's fascinating speech, the notion of art, and what is art about? Now, I spent a lot of my childhood involved doing art because my parents are both retired art teachers. And so I was dragged around art galleries all over Spain, France, and whatever. A lot of my childhood involved art, often finding a chair in the middle of the room and sitting on it and reading the Beano, while my parents walked around the room and went, oh, deep, that is deep, like that. But art, what is art about? And there is a degree to which art is about something that perhaps those of us on the right are less willing to engage in than people on the left, because we see it as a bit feminine and a bit gay. But that is self-awareness. That is understanding who you are and what you are doing and why you are doing it, and in making sense in new and interesting ways of the nature of life and the nature of human experience and what you are going through. And I want to look at that today in relation to the right, and I want to sort of launch off the notion of genius in order to do that. But it does raise a very important question, which is that all of us have really two key sets of motivations, and it's being aware of these and being aware of how these conflict with each other, and being able to find a way of coping with that conflict, which often is how art is what art kind of tries to do. And perhaps we shouldn't be ashamed of that. If I give you an example, when I was at university, I don't know if anyone in this room is familiar with a group called the Christian Union. This is an evangelical student group. They were established at Cambridge in about 1870, and they've moved to various other universities. And that's what I did my doctoral thesis on, which led to a book called Meeting Jesus at University, Rites of Passage and Student Evangelicals. Now, one way of interpreting those people is basically as hypocrites, in the sense that they would set out very clear rules. You are not supposed to get drunk. You're not supposed to even randomly get off with a bird in a pub. Even that was prohibited. No, you were meant to get off with a bird. You were meant to kiss a girl as part of an established relationship, where it was made clear in the Christian Union that you were in a relationship. You'd say, "Oh, are they a boyfriend and girlfriend?" No, they're deciding whether they want to be boyfriend and girlfriend. Everything was formal. It was kind of like a sect. It had an in-group dialect, as sects often do. Terms such as slobs, study leaders' own Bible study, in-group dialect. And it's not that dissimilar in many ways to us. In many ways, we are a bit like fundamentalist Christians, in the sense that fundamentalist Christians, at least at Cambridge University or wherever, are countercultural to the general decadent, hedonistic lifestyle, at least that was the case when I was at university in the late 90s. Now, as I understand it, they're all vegetarians, they don't drink, and the nightclubs are closing down, and university is ghastly. But in the late 90s, when a university was actually fun and involved learning things and that sort of stuff, and being questioned, then that's what they were like. They were countercultural, they were against sex before marriage, they were against snogging random birds in bars, they were against the whole culture of the drug experimentation, the whole culture of the university. That was their ideal. But of course they would err. Of course they would. And they even had a word for that, which was backsliding. Backsliding. So you've become a Christian, you've embraced Christ into your life and you follow him, but then you get a bit pissed and you snog a random bird in a bar. That is backsliding. And then they would sort of pray about it and whatever, and congress with each other and all this, and then they would move on. It was a tension. It created a tension in them. And in some of them, that tension was so pronounced that sometimes you would see what is a conversion experience, a dramatic religious experience, which is something which seems to happen when the body is, when you're so stressed and so high in neuroticism and so on edge that there is a kind of a collapse, that you're so heightened in your arousal that then the alternative, the quiescence, the calming mechanism hits in. And as it does this, because you are so stressed and on edge, you are highly instinctive. And because you are highly instinctive, and because we are evolved to believe in God, that's why religiousness hits in at times of stress, because it's an adaptive trait. We are evolved to believe in God. We are evolved to over-detect agency, that sort of thing. Then at that point, they would, I don't know, see a face, what looks like a face in a wall. And then suddenly that's the face of God. And then suddenly they're overwhelmed by feelings of joy. And then you have this conversion experience. And then this leaves them in a better state of mind for a while. This sort of tension could be so severe. But that was what they struggled with. And I think we should be honest about the fact that in many ways, those of us in this room, again with reference to Alexander's kind of art and the idea of a right-wing art, probably go through something not entirely dissimilar. This movement, this group, those of us in this room are like the fundamentalists. We are, in a sense, this whole thing, we are all, Black Lives Matter or whatever, we are all black people now, or we are identifying with some group. Well, we are all fundamentalists now. Because like fundamentalists, we sit on the borders of a society which we regard as completely insane, as decadent, as just revolting, as just against anything that is kind and good and reasonable. We have come together to be with other people whom we regard as sane, so that we can, for some of us it's quite frequent, for some of us it's infrequent. It used to be for me, before I did the Jolly Heretic and started getting invited to conferences like this, it was once a year. Once a year there would be the London Conference on Intelligence. Once a year I got to meet people where I could talk about the empirical science and whatever without the risk of causing offence to some mental arm-cutting, blue-haired, crazy bitch. Once a year. And I cannot tell you how much I look forward to it. That one conference, once a year, of sanity, where you could talk about the facts. And then one year, this chap, who was a Cambridge student, brought his girlfriend along, who was South Asian. And she said, no, honestly, she's based. It's okay, she's based, don't worry. And I made her cry. I didn't mean to make her cry, but I accidentally said things that were empirically accurate and too much so, and it made her cry. And I felt that this was interfering with my safe space. Of this conference. This was terrible, what this chap had done by bringing his girlfriend along. But that is the kind of position we are, all of us, in. We are a bit like fundamentalists. And you have this tension of, I suppose, because we are pack animals, but because in prehistory we had to rise to the top of the pack in order to pass on our genes. We know this, there's lots of data on this, and if you want to see it, there's my book at the back at our wit's end, you can go and buy it afterwards. We, all of us, have these two inclinations inside us, to be group-oriented and to do what's good for the group, which, by the way, is associated with being high in agreeableness, high in conscientiousness, being mentally stable, and to be individually oriented, which is that you strive out and you do what is good for you. Now, that can be also good for the group, indirectly. For example, if you are a psychopath and you enjoy killing, then you will join the army and you will become a commando and you will kill people and you will thoroughly enjoy it. I mean, for you, this is good for you. This really gets you. But it's also good for the group indirectly because you're killing the enemies of the group and so on. But there will be that tension. And often, even within our own lifetimes, let's be frank, we oscillate between these different sets of inclinations. And particularly when people are young, when people are in their early 20s or whatever, on average, people are objectively less intelligent because intelligence goes up with age. I mean, you literally become better at cognitive problem solving with age. I thought it was up to the age of 50, but I've read a recent paper which indicates, no, you carry on becoming up to the age of 50, and then you don't decline. You stay the same up to about 75. So those of you in this room that have concluded that you're silly old people, you're possibly not. You're possibly actually as intelligent as you were when you were 50, which is worth thinking about, I think, really. But also these teenagers, these late adolescents, they are low in agreeableness, they are low in conscientiousness, and they are mentally unstable. And they are more so than they were. It literally goes up at a certain point, this antisocial personality. And this is a good thing because it allows you to strive out. It allows you, when you have to impress the birds or whatever in a polygamous society in which basically mating is a zero-sum game and all the women want to go for the high-status man, it allows you to stand out. It allows you to get status. It allows all of those sorts of things. So that's why it happens. But then there's a tension. There becomes a tension between being individually oriented and group oriented. And these things oscillate. And we all kind of paper over the cracks. It's in all of us. And we at any point normally will come roughly down on the side of being individually oriented, i.e. left-wing. Left-wing people are basically concerned with themselves. Although, ironically, they go on about how concerned they are with other people. And right-wing people are basically concerned with the group, but then, ironically, they come across as being concerned with themselves to the extent that they might offend left-wing opinion or whatever. That can come across to people as a selfish, antisocial act, which is what I'm not quite. I don't think it's quite true that truth is necessarily always on the side of the right. And most people will come to some kind of equilibrium across time, and that's who they are, roughly, but they struggle with these tensions. And you get, the highly conservative, whatever, Tory MP who shags his secretary, notoriously, or the left-wing MP who leaves all his money to his kids and family and makes sure they're rich, or whatever. You always get these tensions. Are we okay here? Yes? Oh, Tar. Cheers, Tar, thanks a lot. So you're very, very selfless, right-wing, kind act there. A left-wing person wouldn't do that. They just let me cough. Last year, I ran out of water, and this German girl ran up with some more water for me, which was very kind of her. Again, right-wing German girl. This is the tension that exists in all of us, and art is often an attempt to express that tension and that feeling that it's not quite right. And there's weird contradictions in this as well. So, for example, in general, people who are on the right feel that they have agency, feel that they are in control of their world. But yet at the same time, those people are much more likely to believe in God, and belief in God involves kind of thinking that you don't have agency and someone else is in control of your world and he will make sure that all is okay in the end. And I never saw this better expressed than in an evangelical Christian housemate of mine who, when she was 20 or 21, was applying for some job or something or other. And she said, if I do get the job, that's great, because I've got the job and I want the job, i.e. it's her agency and her brilliance that has got her the job. But if I don't get the job, that's also great, because it's God's will and he's got some other plan for me. So you can't lose with that. And it ensures that you always feel good about life, that you always feel positive. And this is what belief in God seems to be. It hits in at times, or at least partly, it hits in at times of stress such that you don't feel too mad, you don't feel too crazy. God hits in when you are confronted, in particular, with mortality salience, with death. And probably one of the reasons why people increasingly don't believe in God is because there is so much less death than there used to be. If you go back to the generation born in 1900, most people lost a sibling, probably, as a child. Now, losing a sibling losing a child is so rare, it's almost unbelievable. And the response to it, my wife is a hospital chaplain, and she frequently deals with babies dying. And of course, the response to it is just so overwhelming. It's just so rare, and the attitude is, why me? But that's the contradiction on the right. The weird thing on the left, then, is they tend to not believe that they have a sense of agency. They tend to believe that they are more likely to believe that something's in control of the world and there's bad things in control of the world, that they're not in control of their own lives, but yet they don't believe in God. They tend not to believe in God. So actually then it's just chaos. There's nothing to fall back on. So you have this weird set of contradictions. Now, in looking at the psychology of different groups on the right, I want to start off with basically what we're not, and then move into some of the things that we are. So what we're not is the thing that has very much taken over this country and the West over the last 30 years, and I referenced her earlier, which is the girl who has basically borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is a cluster B condition. It goes together with things like narcissism, Machiavellianism, that sort of thing, which is defined by intense fear of abandonment, also intense fear of engulfment, so of being dominated by other people, and of huge emotional dysregulation. So these women will engage in intense swings. It also crosses over to some degree with narcissism, which is a reaction to being highly mentally unstable and feeling terrible about yourself. You deal with it by saying, I'm brilliant, I'm wonderful, I'm the best, I'm superior, I'm great. I'm morally superior, I'm morally better than other people. What the left say, I'm morally better than other people. And this helps you deal with your negative feelings. Now, this evokes a sort of a narcissistic rage if someone confronts you with your real self, because that could mean that you're confronted with how awful you are, and this could be so terrible that you could basically kill yourself. That you feel literally unsafe, as they often say, and so therefore you react with narcissistic rage to make the interlocutor go away. How this operates in girls is that they will tend to find boyfriends, often high-status boyfriends that are much older than them, and idealise them. And of course they must idealise them, because if I'm perfect, surely my boyfriend, who I love, is perfect. And think they're wonderful and love bomb them and all this sort of thing, and sort of bring them into their circle, and then eventually the boyfriend will upset them, and they will then de-idealise them in a flash, because suddenly they're terrible and they're awful people, and they're all the more awful because they're confronting me with the fact that I must be awful because I'm in love with this person. And so then you get this de-idealisation and this crash, and also a crash in other things as well. So their identity is unstable. They're so prone to mood swings that they'll go from being absolutely certain, this is what I want, this is my life, this is what I am, I'm happy, I'm going to do this, I'm this person, to a complete crash down to I don't know who I am, and then a complete change in identity. And these are the kinds of people that have taken over. Why do they dye their hair purple? Because they feel ghastly on the inside and so they express it on the outside. Or because they want to invoke disgust in people and upset people and have a sense of power over them, or whatever. Why do they cut their arms or burn their arms? Well, because they have a sense that the world is chaos, and they say this makes them feel in control. It makes them feel a sense of pain, or a sensation that they can at least control. And so 80% of women that are diagnosed with this disorder cut themselves. And or burn themselves, or do other things to mutilate their bodies, such as cover themselves in ghastly tattoos, or even, of course, these trans men. And if you look at the research on women who go through a phase of being a boy by doing things like strapping their breasts back and taking puberty blockers and whatever, what this is basically is a kind of controlled self-harm. That's what this kind of is. So, and it is, and of course, if you contradict these people, and they will tend to be left-wing, because being left-wing, as I've discussed ad nauseum in various books, is associated with neuroticism. You have low self-esteem, low self-worth, you fear a fair fight, but you are individually oriented. You are not group-oriented. You are selfish, you are Machiavellian, you are narcissistic, you want power. But you're also very, very fearful, very, very unhappy in yourself, and so how can you play for status? You play for status covertly, in the same way that women play for status. covertly. How do you do that? You virtue signal about equality and about harm avoidance. And that's what left-wingness, to some extent, is, that you are signalling about equality and harm avoidance as a covert way to get power. And you are also high in resentment and so of those that have power, and so you are resentful of the symbols of power, the traditions, as Alexander was saying, the nice old building that's beautiful, that represents the traditional power system. Well, you resent that. So let's put something bloody ugly on the end of it to have a feeling of power over it. So, and then if someone challenges you, you just have it. It's what I've always, it's a tantrum. You have a tantrum. And you see these women, femen, whatever, bare-breasted with slogans on their tits, or, you know, this is tantrums. This is women having tantrums. Why are they having these tantrums? Part of it may well be genetic. I think a very big part of it could be environmental, that we're not bringing children up properly anymore. You don't bring children up to fear authority or to be group-oriented or anything like that. You mollycoddle them. There are schools now where they don't have unsupervised play unless bullying happens. They don't have anything at all unless bullying happens. But bullying can be good. Bullying can be good. Bullying can compel people to behave in a more pro-social manner. That's why it seems to be at about 60% heritable if you are a bully, and 40% heritable if you are a victim. So, this is what we are not. So what are we? What are we? Well, the first thing then, I think, as I said in the speech a number of years ago, is just contrarians. There are going to be certain people among us, and that's where I disagree with something Alexander said, who will be right-wing in a right-wing society, right-wing in a left-wing society, and left-wing in a right-wing society, because they are contrarians. Now, the genius type is very much like that. Now, the book that I was going to talk to you about was, as I say, a new biography of James Watson, the person who discovered the structure of, or co-discovered, well, actually, really, he did discover it, the structure of DNA in 1952. I think we can accept that this person is a genius because the consequences of that discovery are enormous. Targeted therapies for cancer, the ability to solve crime. There's so many areas in which life would be so different if he hadn't discovered the structure of DNA. Now, it used to be the case that we had a certain... These people are antisocial. Why a genius? What is the genius as a person? Well, he has basically outlier high intelligence, very high intelligence, often quite skewed intelligence as well, combined with moderately antisocial traits, the individualism I mentioned earlier. And this stays in the population. Yeah, it allows people to strive out and get status, but it's also good at the group level. At the level of the group, a genius can come up with amazing things, amazing inventions, amazing weapons, whatever, that help the group. And to the extent that you are still group-oriented, and to the extent that you understand the importance of being a dominant group over others, you must tolerate the genius. Because he's moderately low in agreeableness, which means, in conscientiousness, in impulse control, in rule following, which means that he can think outside the box. He can think the unthinkable. He's moderately mentally unstable. This means that he's constantly thinking, he's constantly ruminating, he's constantly processing things, and so he can come up with new ideas. And he's moderately low in agreeableness, which means that he doesn't care if his new idea offends against vested interests, which it inevitably will. And indeed, he's moderately high in autism, which means that you're obsessive, and you're obsessed with finding the truth, and you're obsessed with making sense of things, you take in lots of information. And so he wouldn't even know he was offending people if he did offend people. And it is this kind of person, and Jim Watson is an example. Now, these kinds of people are individually oriented. Individually oriented people, by the way, are evolved to an unstable yet easy ecology in which you live fast and die young, which means you're probably going to be more inclined to have a lot of sex and to be promiscuous. And Jim Watson, everyone's heard of his book, The Double Helix. Have you heard of his book, Genes, Girls and Gamow? It's a success to Double Helix. It's a book about all the women that he's humped and would like to hump. Right, and this is the Nobel Prize-winning genius that has written a whole book about all the different girls that he'd like to bang. So this is the kind of man we're talking about. And he was originally cancelled in 2007 because he gave an interview in which he basically told the truth about race differences and Africa. Now, up until that point, he had been tolerated. He had been tolerated. In the year 2000, there was a huge controversy over a speech that he did in California, basically stating that women that are thin are unhappy, and that men that have dark skin have higher sex drives, and all kinds of things, which are facts, by the way, and which I proved to be facts in my book. But that was the year 2000. Then he got away with it. By 2007, the borderline personality disorder women, the obsession with feelings, had got so intense that he was cancelled. And they made him resign as Chancellor of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, which was DNA Town, which he converted from basically bugger all to this major, major place. Now, in 2019, when we were really in the depths of hell, perhaps more so even than we are now, he was completely cancelled because he was asked in an interview, and I should stress that by this time he's in his late 80s, he was asked in an interview if he changed his mind with regard to this issue, and he said, no, not really, no. And then the laboratory stripped him of all his honours and just basically completely cancelled the guy. But this guy was a Democrat. This guy was brought up when America was a conservative society. This guy was upset. He said, my God, what would my parents say if they heard that I'd been accused of being racist? They'd be so upset. This was his reaction to this. This guy was a man of the left in a context in which, who basically just said whatever the truth was. And if the right are in charge, the truth offends them because they have their dogmas. And if the left are in charge, the truth offends them. And I suspect that the change may have been that we moved too far away from World War II. Some of you in this room, and the Industrial Revolution, where we think back, even to when I was a kid, and I was born in 1980, my grandparents were born in the 20s and 10s, the woman in charge of the country was born in 1925 at the time. These were people that had lived through and fought in a war. And I think that makes you understand the fragility of life, the fragility of civilization, and the importance of being able to tolerate geniuses. The importance of, thank you, one person. The importance of being able to tolerate the eccentric. But as you move away from that, as the war recedes, and my granddad used to tell me war stories every time he came round, and I thought they were fascinating and amazing and brilliant, and I looked forward to it. And it made you proud, and it made you feel secure as a young boy in the 1980s, sitting in McDonald's or whatever I was doing at the time, knowing that the people in charge of your country had fought and won a war. I mean, we haven't got much to show for winning it, but at least we won the bloody thing. I liked that, and I'm sure there was an aware. People were more religious. People had a sense, because they were more religious, of the truth and the importance of the truth. The truth as something fetishized. The truth as something that you aim towards and you fight for, and is fundamentally important and is more important than anything else. Because without the truth on your side, then you make stupid mistakes and you're locked in your bunker and you go mad and you lose the war. So we understood that. And I think this slowly receded. And so the eccentric, and that is one among our group, recedes. Another among our group then would just be the Machiavellian. The person that notices at just someone like the Marquis of Winchester. Is anyone familiar with the Marquis of Winchester? He was the only politician. He lived through. He was a cabinet minister under Henry VIII, under Mary, under Elizabeth. Only one that never lost his head or never lost his possessions, because he kept changing his mind. The Vicar of Bray. So the person that notices the way the wind is blowing at just the right time and gets on board. Now, there are some of us in this room. There's a chap at the back selling a book on the glory days of the British National Party. Right. Now, that's it, Julian Leppert. And that was in a period in which multiculturalism was being critiqued by the BNP. And nobody was listening. There was no Reform Party, there was no GB News, there was none of this whole new kind of right-wing counterculture or counter-elite. It was a group of a mainly working-class party of ordinary people that were seeing their communities wrecked and who suffered severely as a consequence in various ways. And they were of no interest to a lot of people. They were just these thugs. But the Machiavellian will notice the way that the wind is blowing and will get on board at just the right time, with just the right balance of risk. They will note, oh, too risky to be right-wing and conservative and anti-immigration in the year 2000 or in 2005. Oh, no. But by 2015, when things are getting a bit crazy in terms of woke and things are a little bit shifting, well, maybe then. And certainly by 2020, and certainly now, that person gets on board. A good example would be someone like Liz Truss, who has absolutely no principle. Started her career as a Liberal Democrat, moved across to the Conservatives when they were on a downer, so therefore it was, you could get in and maximise, and there weren't enough women MPs for the Tories and all this sort of thing. Get in there just at the right time. But then she's a friend of the LGBT. She's a friend of the LGBT. And now she's saying she's a social conservative, just when it's convenient to do so. So that would be the Machiavellian. And that, I'm afraid, is what a lot of senior politicians are. Someone like John Major, if you read his autobiography, he's perfectly clear he's obsessed with power. He doesn't even hide it. He comes across as all nice, honest John, obsessed with power. The other one, if we move to someone, then is you can get these genius traits, these genius traits that balance in a certain way, but they can be a bit off, or they can be a bit different. So the scientific genius will tend to have very high mathematical intelligence, not so good linguistic. Someone like, they don't necessarily have a massively high IQ, but it will be skewed. So someone like Jim Watson has a tested IQ of 125. Now, that's pretty intelligent. That's the average IQ of your average sort of solicitor or barrister or something like that. That's pretty intelligent, but it's not super duper clever. It's not like the top 2% or anything like that. And the reason for that is that Jim's spatial intelligence was so bad. He had tremendous trouble learning to drive a car, and he can't peel an orange. So he has problems with spatial intelligence. So you get these kinds of skews. And obviously with people that are in the arts or whatever, they're much more verbally tilted, and they're much higher in mental illness. And if that mental illness is in balance, then you get, the poet or the artist. People that are poets and artists are highly mentally ill. They are highly mentally unstable. The study indicating that, a study of very famous, eminent people, 33% of eminent scientists have suffered from depression. It's 72% of writers. 56% of writers have had an unhappy childhood marked by the abandonment by the father, for example. Psychopathy is 18% among eminent scientists, 46% among eminent writers. So these people are psychopathic, these people are mentally ill, but these people do something that is of use to society. If it is slightly off, if the balance is right, you get someone amazing or whatever. If the balance is a bit off, is a bit too mentally ill for their intelligence, a bit too crazy for their intelligence level, because intelligence helps you to be future-oriented and planful, then you kind of get a Jonathan Bowden. And I know, and some people in this room don't like Jonathan Bowden, some people probably worship him. And I did get this reaction of, how dare you write empirically accurate? How dare you report what Jonathan's friends and relations have said about him? How dare you? How dare you destroy the Bowden magic? But obviously this person was, posthumously, he's doing pretty well for himself. But within life, he was rather all over the place, would have collapses, would go mad, would withdraw from substantial periods of time, probably due to depression, was a fantasist and a pathological liar who claimed he had 7 children, one of whom had a finger missing. Friends of his sent birthday presents to these kids, and they didn't exist. Sent birthday presents every year to children that didn't exist. But there's a plus side to this. There's an obvious plus side to this, which is his charisma and his ability to enthuse people, and also certain other skills. And finally, as I wrap up, the final thing we should be aware of, I mentioned borderline personality at the beginning. I increasingly notice what I call the GB News e-girl, which is the person with borderline personality among the right. And you can completely see why this would women who obviously have all the traits of borderline personality, manipulative, idealizing men, huge emotional swings, being a bit of a fantasist, all that sort of self-harming, all those traits, emotional dysregulation, but they have moved over to our side. And you can see this, of course, on the left, histrionic, attention-seeking, all this sort of thing, dyeing their hair purple, all this sort of thing. It doesn't quite get them what they want. It doesn't get them the attention they want. There's too many of them, so they move over to the right. Often, no mentally stable person would go from being woke to being a trad Catholic. Never. Never. This idea that there's redemption for everybody, no, there isn't. Some people, I don't mean to be Calvinist about this, but some people are damned. Some people, some women, some succubuses are damned. And we see them move over whereby they're attention-seeking and saying, oh, they're non-binary and they're all this sort of thing on the left. Of course, they have identity disturbance because part of borderline personality is that you're constantly self-doubting, you constantly fear abandonment, you have no security in the world, you're constantly wondering who you are. And so they cycle through identities, and you'll have this identity collapse, and then you'll have a new identity. And in each case, it will be a very strong identity, because the very strong identity gives you a clear sense of self. I can have many examples. One I have in mind, from being completely left-wing and feminist to being trad Catholic, I'm going to be baptized, obviously, these people are not going to stop being mentally unstable. They're just going to be mentally unstable and cause trouble in a different milieu. And we should be aware of that. So in wrapping up and in going back to the issue of art, I want to say, look around. There's some of you that haven't bothered with the smart casual dress code and look like you're leftists, frankly, but most of you, which is upsetting, because it was stated in the email yesterday. But most of you have this, dressing in this kind of manner embodies self-control, a connection to the ancestors, a connection to history, all of these things that we try to do. But we will also backslide. We will also fail. We will also be drawn into the world of the succubus and the incubus occasionally. And that is where art comes in, and that is where art can help. And so I think it's an excellent idea to have an artistic movement on our side, and we should all support it. And I hope this has made us just slightly more self-aware of who we are. Know thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is us. Okay, thank you very much, chaps.